pretty easy through December.
Oh, yeah.
I saw,
Warmest December.
winter is coming, all of it in a day. Well, I made the mistake of not clearing the day before. I thought, I'll just do it all at once. That was
a mistake.
well, the drive was fine, mostly, except for one spot where there was a pretty nasty drift. It's where they plow you in.
Yeah, at the bottom. Yeah, at the bottom of the driveway. Yeah.
You know, it's,
Every time.
well, and it wouldn't be so bad except it's been salted, so then it ice. Just big chunks of ice.
Yeah, the problem is at the bottom of the driveway, the bank is twice as high as the top of the snowblower.
That's what I had, yeah.
So you gotta.
But I was mocking my neighbor out there in the blizzard, blowing it. But then yesterday I was like, no, he was probably ready. Because he cleared it, while it was still snowing.
Yeah, that's what I did too, yeah.
Yeah.
I know there was a little snow.
Morning.
Morning. Welcome to the Great White North.
Good morning. Hi, how are you?
Frozen tundra.
So Vicky, is the lake froze over
Are you
here?
good? That's actually true. That's a true story.
Maybe hell froze over.
Yeah.
What?
Is the lake froze over now?
Nope. Still too
The
warm.
waves are still bashing against the shore?
Yes. Yes, they are. They're big waves.
I don't know, by the end of this week though.
Oh yeah, the ice chunks are starting.
Yeah.
I looked out this morning and they're
They're floating.
Yeah. It'll be, yeah.
This is Corporal Milkway passed us on 57. There's a couple of cars, and then he passed the whole works. All the way down there. Once in a while you see the milk wagon making butter.
Churning, huh?
Uh-oh.
I thought the highway was gonna be better than it was.
Yeah.
No, I think southbound was worse than northbound.
Everybody on
Drifting.
Facebook says Sheboygan County is worse than any other.
Oh, it's always been that way.
Yeah.
Sheboygan County's always been the worst for roads.
What's the name of the person?
Well, they closed 43 last night to get rid of the semi that ejected on there.
Yeah.
I had one semi trailer dislodged from the tractor up there on 67 and PP. Where when you go to Solid Horse Place.
Yeah.
The semi, the trailer is in the ditch on the back wheels are up. And the tractor is standing over there.
Where did the tip onto the people's truck?
Oh my.
In the driveway. Yeah, it's fine.
Well, the trucks have to run. It's like the spice has to flow.
I can't hear
I can't get through my eyes.
you. Crawl underneath the table. He's going.
Pull that,
Yeah, pull that
pull
chair
that
out.
other chair out in the front, I think.
Thanks, Pastor. Where are we talking to
No, we're not. That's for after, that's for,
Yep.
I have to eat before I
Yeah, no, that's fair
I
enough.
have to eat quick, so
Fair enough.
I brought some.
Did you
For
grab it?
everybody.
Did you grab it?
Everybody gonna grab a little hunk?
Oh,
After church. Oh, yes.
For the cleanup, huh? For the.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, we gotta take down.
Undecorated.
No, and I don't know when Jesse made it out yesterday, but I know.
Oh,
That's why I was like,
he sent me a text message at 7:45 saying, let me say it again.
PM? At night?
No, this morning.
Oh, this morning.
Here's some bread. Oh, I think I did.
Yeah, there's a new one and an old one. They both say, the old one says 44.1F. Just look at the date.
Yeah. I know, I just.
Yeah, Ann and the kids are doing a thing at Emmanuel in Sheboygan, so I was like,
I know.
take your time. Northbound is better than southbound, though.
Yes, I do what I want.
Me too. That's the truth.
Well, and I don't know if 28 or if go all the way, 28's worse than going all the way up to
Yeah.
Whatever. It's usually not so good.
Yeah.
So-
That's what I was going to warn her maybe. But,
Yeah.
you know, we're adults here.
Yeah.
Did you?
His first lesson for us.
Oh, my.
I mean, like 25, 30 all the way.
Yeah, right, exactly.
What did we take, 57 to
What?
Well, there's kind of no point in complaining.
$100, I said, what did we take, 57 to
41.
Peel,
Oh.
and then over to
Right.
32.
67, 32.
This is shut out.
And then to 67 up to 151 or whatever.
It sounds like you're play calling at quarterback. 44, 31,
I had
27.
something at home.
Right, he went on the EH and that X or whatever, it's like 2 feet of snow all the way across when he was driving the truck, you know. 2 feet across. Yeah, whatever.
Jesse said he was here at 4 o'clock. He doesn't say whether it was PM or AM.
No. Yeah, I wondered.
Is he cleaned out the,
He cleaned up and he said he found him somewhere.
we were wondering
But he
last.
says he's not going to make it in this morning.
No, I didn't imagine as much. Yeah, all the farm guys did a lot. You saw the Rathke's there. Thing collapsed.
Oh, no.
They had like the hoop. They had the hoop barn from just the weight of the snow.
No.
Yeah.
It's
so wet underneath.
It was.
Snow.
Yeah. Well, that's why I say I don't mind 2 or 3 inches at a time. It's just
Not 14.
yeah. I was tempted to email my friends in Big Bear, California. They're up in the mountains because they get 12, 14 inches on the snowfall. It's like no big deal. I'm like, yeah, you guys you're dumb. That's what I was going to tell them.
Girlfriend a while ago, now they're engaged, he said, but she had not seen snow like this, and I said, oh, you came at the right day.
Yeah, exactly.
Welcome to snow.
Where is she from?
Ohio, where it's living now.
Does it seems? Oh, I did. I made it a little.
Yeah, I saw the picture of it with
Yeah.
See if I can make it a little brighter yet. With the sunlight coming in on it. Oh no.
He was sitting on one chair, and I over to that chair, he was gone, I think he went to the bathroom. She said, or she's good, but.
I could maybe buy something or give Allie money to get something.
Is there a sign
Like,
up
I'm
on
gonna
the?
wait for
Is there a sign
breakfast to
up
come
on the?
back. It's probably what
There should be a sign up out there.
I didn't,
For
I didn't
the,
check.
for the, for the.
She made one. I don't.
Okay.
It should be out there.
I'll just give her some money to get some.
Yeah. All right. Well, we should start so that we get somewhere. Yep. So to review, we didn't actually finish verse 10, but if you remember, 44 has to do. The beginning had to do with. Well, let's see. We finished all the temple stuff. Now we're dealing with the priesthood, right? And remember, the contrast here is that the priesthood in the heavenly Jerusalem, in the heavenly temple, there can be no abominations. There will be no abominations, right? And of course, then we talked at length last time, I think, about the circumcision of the heart and the circumcision of the flesh and the distinction between the two. This will come up again today when it comes to clothing, so we'll come back to that. All right. Now, what we didn't talk about here was this this bit about the Zadoks, the Zadokite priests. All right. Yeah. And so I gave you some notes about this on the bottom of the last week. All right, so there's a distinction here. I'm just going to read it because my memory's not so good. You'll see at the very bottom here, but the priests, the Levites, the sons of Zadok, who kept charge of. So there seems to be 3 categories of Levites being presented. There's the Zadoks, Zadokite, the ones who followed after Zadok, who they're the faithful ones. Then there's the other Levites who can serve as priests but had been unfaithful but now are cleansed. And then there's the Levites who cannot serve as priests because of their impurity. So you got it? So Levites that can't serve, Levites that can serve, and then the Zadokite are the kind of like highest class of people, the ones who can serve closest to the altar. This was true at the time of Jesus too. Not all Levites were priests. But the problem then is the Levites, their inheritance, that will come in maybe today. I don't know if we'll get to their inheritance. But because they weren't given an allotment when the kingdom was divided amongst the sons of Jacob and Joseph, yeah. All right, so all Levites, priests and non-priests, not descended from Zadok, are in view in these verses that are on the screen. So I'm just reading this before we read it. The focus seems to be on the non-Zadok priests, with whom the Zadokites are then contrasted in the 15 and 16. So we'll get to that. Except for the Zadokites, all the other Levitical priests are, in Ezekiel's vision, demoted to occupy the same inferior status as the non-priestly Levites. All right, that's interesting, right? At the golden calf incident, the Levites had remained loyal to Yahweh, Exodus 32. God elected the entire tribe as a collective firstborn from all the tribes. And we heard about this week with Samuel, right? In the daily prayer, that Hannah actually committed to leave Samuel in as a priest. So he was not redeemed or bought back. Normally, the Levites would take the place of your firstborn. That's how it worked in that system. We talked about that in the daily prayer, which you all heard. All right. The Levites were to be his ministerial servants. He had established their office as a kind of covenant or promise. In particular, the Levites were charged with protecting the holiness of the sanctuary by preventing lay access, so like guardsmen. But now the Levites are charged with having gone astray from Yahweh by participating in idolatry with fecal deities, Ezekiel's favorite term for idols. This participation was both by active involvement in priestly service before idols, so they actively served idols, and passively by failing to oppose and curtail idolatry. So this is all really relevant when we heard about Eli, right? His sons were active in participation in idol worship, but Eli's failing, of course, was not to defend the access to the ark and to the temple rites and the priesthood, right? Eli, notably, was just sitting on his chair by the door, right? And then by the end, we find out not only was he sitting on his chair, but he had grown
Old and heavy.
yeah, heavy, right? Well, and which is the way the Bible's saying that he didn't do his job, right? That he just sat around. All right. Let's see, where were we? In the active and passive. There we go. Examples of such apostasy can be found throughout the history of the tabernacle, Moses to Solomon, and temple, Solomon to Ezekiel's day. So that's really the history of the tabernacle and temple, is both either active idolatry or just passive neglect, right? So sometimes they're not setting up idols in the sanctuary. Sometimes they're just not going, not attending to, forgetting to even keep the Passover, for example. Already in Moses' lifetime, Korah from the tribe of Levi led a large number of Israelites into perdition or rebellion. We read that earlier this year in our daily prayer. Throughout the long periods of mass syncretism, that's when you merge Yahweh worship or God worship with false worship, and apostasy, that's when you just reject God altogether, recorded in Kings, the Levites were undoubtedly just as culpable as unfaithful priests. So that's why here, when we'll read this again to review, they all get the blame, either through passive, neglect or through active participation. This past participation is not overlooked, and so to bear the punishment, the non-Zadokite Levitical priests are limited to serving before them the people, as did the non-priestly Levites. Right, so only the Zadokites are the ones who are going to come into close to the altar. The non-Zadokite are going to be out in the outer courts with the people. Of the priests, only the Zadokites will be given the privilege of performing the most sacred ceremonies under the supervision of the prince, who we talked about, who will supply the sacrifices. All right, so that's our review. We didn't get to that last week, but now we can read what we just talked about. Should I move this? Do you think it'd be better over there?
No.
I'm going to block everybody's access one way or
I have
another.
a comment.
Yeah,
I
go.
feel like when you said active idolatry and
Yeah.
or passive neglect,
Right,
that's us too.
right. Yep.
Like on a daily basis. It's and or both or one or the other. It feels
Right.
like it's always one of them.
Right, and I think, yeah, it's all of us, but
Oh.
part of the problem is that we like to consider neglect to be a lesser offense. All right, so I mean, like today might be one of those days where, look, use act according to faith and according to conscience, but also reason. Reason is the handmaid to faith. So if you can't drive here safely, then don't, right? That would be to neglect your body. But that doesn't mean then, well, just check out. Maybe like open your Bible, look up the readings, those from last week, pray with your family, that kind of thing. Don't neglect the word entirely just because you can't get here, right? I mean, that would be That's it's not active, it's really just passive, but then it becomes kind of active in its own way. Yeah.
We can listen to it on.
Yeah, but then as you know, that can also then be used as like, well, it's always available for me online, which means I never listen to it. It's like, well, wait a minute. So it is kind of a strange dynamic, which we've got to play with a lot since COVID, right? Is that the dynamic of like, well, you want the word to be accessible and easy to acquire and to hear, but at the same time, if it's so easy that you could just, walk up to the buffet and get it, just open your phone and there it is. Well, does that actually encourage active participation? Not really. And of course, I did this once or twice, having pre-recorded the service. You sit around in your pajamas, you're really not as engaged as you are when you have made the effort to get here physically. So I experienced that too. So yeah, active and passive. So either way, it's an abomination. The problem with the active is that, especially if you're a priest, now you're encouraging others into that same participation, right? But I suppose you could do that passively. Like if you're a parent and you neglect attending to God's word, your children will receive that, So, I was thinking of a song lyric. It's from Free Will by Rush, Free Will.
Oh. If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice.
Right, which is quoting Ayn Rand, which probably doesn't belong here, but in any case. Yeah, well, he's singing, but Neil Peart wrote it, and he's quoting from Ayn Rand. Anyway.
How'd you know?
Yeah.
I love Rush.
All right, so we should read this.
Okay.
And the Levites who went far from me when Israel went astray, who strayed away from me after their idols, they shall bear their iniquity. Which seems kind of harsh because this is heaven, right? This is eschatological, and yet they're going to bear their iniquity. We'll get to this. Yet they shall be ministers in my sanctuary as gatekeepers of the house and ministers of the house, right? The outer courts. They shall slay the burnt offering and the sacrifice for the people. They shall stand before them to minister to them, because they ministered to them before their idols and caused the house of Israel to fall into iniquity. Therefore I have raised my hand and an oath against them, says the Lord God, that they shall bear their iniquity. And they shall not come near me to minister to me as priest, nor come near any of my holy things, nor enter the most holy place, but they shall bear their shame and their abominations which they have committed. Nevertheless, I will make them keep charge of the temple for all its work and for all that has to be done in it. I said we should probably read that's actually pretty good there. All right, so you'll note they have been demoted, and the things that they're given to do are actually the things that the laymen are also already given to do if you go read Leviticus. So that's the beginning of today's sheet. The first duty of the Zadokite priest is to be guards over the gates of the temple. The second duty is to slaughter the non-Zadokite priests, is what I should have written here, I think. The second duty of slaughter of sacrifice is given to non-Zadokite priests. There we go. But as I note, in Leviticus 1 and 3, this duty was given to laymen. But in Ezekiel's vision, only the priests as laymen aren't allowed in the inner court. So this is eschatological, where actually there's no distinction between the non-Zadokite priests and the laymen. They're all given to sacrifice and prepare the sacrifice and to take care of the temple, or the house as it's called here. And then that third duty is official service. As we go forward, you'll see all the roles again. But here again, they're emphasizing their previous failures. And I know this sounds harsh to bring up their failures in the light of this heavenly vision. This is picked up in the New Testament, though, right? Where Jesus, Salome, the wife of Zebedee, asked that James and John sit at Jesus' right and left hand, right? And Jesus says, it's not given for me to do that. But also then when you get to like Revelation, I got to stay out of the glare of the light. When you get to Revelation and other places, you do hear of an ordering to heaven, right? Where you have the 4 living beasts and then the 12 elders and eventually you get out to the 144,000. And there's a way of thinking of that as being, like more important to less important. Of course, as the New Testament teaches, there is no distinction, right? Male and female, slave nor free. All are equal before Christ, right, in their baptism. But it does seem that the ordering of heaven is based off of the work that was done on earth. At least when it comes to the priesthood, comes to pastors. So this is why pastors have a little bit different burden than a lay minister or any kind of ministry, in that there is a special threat against pastors who are unfaithful, right, which they bear into eternity, and also then maybe a reward too. That's the way the New Testament talks, as well as the Old. So that's what's going on here too. Yes, their past lapses are forgotten and forgiven, and so they're not actually excluded entirely from the house, are they? But yet they're rehabilitated and recommissioned in this role now. So, yeah. Questions so far? Some of this seems a little bit... it would just be a lot more relevant to you if you had grown up in the tabernacle or in the temple, having seen all the priests and the different orders of priests and whatnot. All right, now we can move on. 15. Let's just read 15 and 16 to start. Anybody can do it.
But the priests, the Levites, the sons of Zadok, who kept charge of my sanctuary when the children of Israel went astray from me, they shall come near me to minister to me, and they shall stand before me to offer to me the fat and the blood, says the Lord God. They shall enter my sanctuary, and they shall come near my table to minister to me, and they shall keep my charge.
Yeah, to keep my charge is kind of an interesting expression. I don't know, what is ESV? How do they translate that? Yeah, keep my charge. Yeah, I mean, follow the instructions that I've given them, right? Do as I've commanded them, you might say. All right, so now we have these special priests mentioned. So on the handout, the Levitical priest is a phrase from Deuteronomy used to distinguish legitimate priests from illegitimate competitors, such as those later instituted by the Northern Kingdom. Remember, the king of the North did not want his people going down to Jerusalem to worship. One, you lose some tourism money. You know, it's like what do they say if the Packers are in the playoff? We get $15 billion in tax revenue or something. I read an article about that. Maybe it was $1 million, right? Through people traveling and buying stuff. But it's the same idea. You don't want to every year have them making pilgrimage down to the other kingdom. It seems like a split allegiance. Where you worship is where you live, or you want to worship where you live. So the king of the north founded at Dan and at Bethel these alternate places of worship with priests that God had not ordained. So that's what's in mind there. So Levitical priests served in the south in Judah or Judea. All legitimate priests were sons of Aaron within the tribe of Levi. No problem there. Thus all priests were Levites, but not all Levites were priests, which we talked about. The other Levites, not descended from Aaron, served at the tabernacle, later the temple, but carried out only secondary ministerial service. So that's confusing, right? So we have Levites that are of Aaron. Those can serve as priests, but not all do. Then there are Levites that are outside of Aaron, because Aaron was of the tribe of Levi. But those, because they're not from Aaron, descending from Aaron, they don't serve as priests. But they can serve in a secondary role, in service outside the altar. Aaron had 4 sons, but you know about Nadab and Abihu with their unlawful fire. Remember that? Numbers 3. So they perished because of their liturgical infidelity and had no heirs. So the only Levitical priests then are descended from one of Aaron's 2 remaining sons, Eleazar and Ithamar. This is all Bible history. You're going to win Bible trivia now. Okay.
Remember it first.
Right.
It's the problem.
So Aaron's the first priest. All priests descend from Aaron. Aaron only had 2 sons that lived. His elder 2 sons died without heirs because of their infidelity. So you're going to be a priest either after Eleazar or Ithamar. Good so far? Okay. In Ezekiel's vision, God adds a further stipulation that only those descended from Zadok are to be priests. So now the question is, who is Zadok? Right? Zadok, the priest, was the son of Ahitub from the line of Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron. So you can see that in 1 Chronicles. So Zadok is of the Eleazar line, son of Aaron. And that's not I don't think that's the same Phinehas. That's the son of Eli. All right. But I might be wrong about that. No, I am wrong about that. It is the son of Eli. Yeah. Eli was of the house of Eleazar too. Right. This is the same guy. I think I actually note that here later on. During Absalom's rebellion against his father, King David, the priests Zadok and Abiathar, who was apparently the high priest, remained faithful to David. So this is in the background of this story. However, subsequently, Abiathar participated in the ordination of Adonijah as king to succeed David without David's approval, or God's really. King David had Zadok anoint Solomon as his rightful successor. This is the Game of Thrones stuff here. Solomon then expelled Abiathar from the priesthood, banished him, and promoted Zadok to high priest in his place. So Zadok supported David, so Zadok gets to be high priest. Abiathar is expelled because he supported the insurrection. January 6th moment here. All right. Abiathar was a descendant of Aaron through his son Ithamar, and was apparently the last priest of the line of Eli. So wait a minute. Ithamar. Wait a minute. So that does not know. See, I did get confused. So it's not the same Phinehas. It's a different Phinehas, because Phinehas would then be of Ithamar as well, right? If Abiathar is of the line of Eli, you can go read that in 1 Samuel. All right. Solomon's expulsion of Abiathar from the priesthood was in fulfillment of the prophecy given to young Samuel at Shiloh about the decline of Eli's descendants. We just read this. So we should know this, right? Yeah, well, you didn't see how it played out here. What did we just say? 1 Samuel 22, right? Where did I say?
6.
No, 6. Yeah, that's probably too early. 1 Samuel 22, verse 6 to 23. No, I wanted chapter 2. I wanted the other reference. Sorry, Karen. I have both listed there. Chapter 2, verse 30 is what I wanted. We heard this week, right? Therefore, the Lord God of Israel says, I said indeed that your house and the house of your father would walk before me forever. But now the Lord says, far be it from me. For those who honor me, I will honor, and those who despise me will be lightly esteemed. Behold, the days are coming. I will cut off your arm and the arm of your father's house. All right. And Hophni and Phinehas both die in one day, right? And we read about that this week too. So he's going to cut off Eli's house. But it takes a while, right? It takes all the way until the reign of David. So you have Saul's reign, and then you have David's reign, and it's during David's reign, towards the end of his reign with appointing his successor, that finally Eli's house is cut off. So it does take what is that? That's probably 50 or 60 years, maybe? Something like that. All right. No, that's not where we are. Back to Ezekiel 44. All right, where were we? Solomon's expulsion. Yeah, there we go. We already read that. All right, so you get the idea. Zadok was a faithful priest. And of course, Adonijah is not of the seed line, so cannot fulfill the promise made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to David. Right, so he is definitely illegitimate king. They're going against God's word. God had established David as the household to which the king would come, namely Christ. All right, so that's why Zadok is promoted there, and then the Zadokine line here is then made, because of that faithfulness, I would suggest, made to be the priest, the only faithful priest. So that's in the background of this, and I think Ezekiel just assumes, oh yeah, you know the story of Zadok. Now, if you grew up in a priestly family like Ezekiel did, maybe these are the kind of stories that your parents tell you about the faithful and unfaithful priest, right, at the time of David. Does that follow? All right. So now we want to talk about his clothes, or their clothes, I should say. I think, I don't know where to stop, so maybe we should just read through 22, and then we'll break it down.
And it shall be, whenever they enter the gates of the inner court, that they shall put on linen garments. No wool shall come upon them while they minister within the gates of the inner court or within the house. They shall have linen turbans on their heads and linen trousers on their bodies. They shall not clothe themselves with anything that causes sweat. When they go out to the outer court, up to the people, they shall take off their garments in which they have ministered, leave them in the holy chambers, and put on other garments. And in their holy garments they shall not sanctify the people. They shall neither shave their heads nor let their hair grow long, but they shall keep their hair well trimmed. No priest shall drink wine when he enters the inner court. They shall not take as wife a widow or a divorced woman, but take virgins of the descendants of the house of Israel, or widows of priests.
Okay, so we'll talk about that. One of the things that we probably should note before we get too far, I actually wrote it down. Well, there you go. That the rest of the chapter is a collection of various regulations about the conduct of these priests. And most of the rules are identical to those that were given by Moses in the Torah, so think Exodus and Leviticus, and Deuteronomy for that matter. The first thing he's going to attend to is the clothing of the priests. And this might seem a little like, what do you want to say, too particular? Like, why spend so much time on their clothing? Why even talk about what they wear? There's what's that axiom or that maxim that people say? The clothing make the man. Isn't that what it is? Is that how it goes? The clothes make the man, yeah. And I don't know where that came from historically, but it is reflected in what's being said here, namely that their outer disposition, this is also true with their being drunk or not, but also with the cut of their hair. But here in particular, their clothing reveals their inner disposition. So you would probably liken this to a wedding, right? Is that, with rare exceptions, the bride usually wears white to a wedding, right? Why is that? You've heard me talk about this before. Yeah, purity, right. That regardless of whether she's been physically pure, right, she comes to the wedding in the forgiveness of sins to be joined to her husband. And of course, this is then, as we'll hear in church today, a picture of Christ and his church. This is what Christ did to us. We read this back in Ezekiel 34, I think, right? Remember with the women that he cleansed, that he brought, they were left in their blood, and he raised them up and he cleansed them, right, and made them holy, right? Which is what he does for us too. Of course, they rejected it. God willing, we don't. So his outer appearance is for the inner. Now, why no wool and only linen? I think he later tells us right here, right? Yeah. Especially in the summer, right? Are you going to wear the wool? No. Better linen, right? Sorry for the glare. Is it glare for you or just for me? Oh, it's just for me. Okay. Because of this, which now it makes me think about how stupid hot it is in July and August in our church. And it doesn't matter what I wear, I'm sweating. We haven't talked about this before, actually, I don't think, but that the emissions of the priest, can desecrate him too. So, anything that comes out of his body. So if he's got a cough, or you think of all the different things that can come out of you. All right, any of that will desecrate him. He'll have to go through, ritual cleansing before coming before the Lord again. Then here it's just sweat, right? It's just sweat. That would actually make him not able to serve. So wear the linen. And nice, like a seersucker or something, right? It's going to seem like a tangent, but when you watch like old TV shows and movies and they're wearing like a 3-piece suit in the summer, and you're like, what? How are you doing that? They'll have a dress shirt and a tie and a sweater vest and a jacket, and you're like, and it's summer.
Think about the women. They had all the undergarments, and they wore garters and hose.
Right.
And, it was layers of gloves. You didn't go without your hand, your gloves, and your, you know what I mean?
And they're not sweating, it's the thing. And I'm like, so did something change? Did we change?
Yeah, that could actually, more unhealthy, maybe.
This summer when we were on vacation in Tennessee, I had to recharge the AC in the van because it stopped working. And And so I split up from the rest of everybody else, and I went to AutoZone, right, to get some coolant. And then driving through whatever town it was in Tennessee, I can't remember where we were, I drove past a funeral home. And everybody attending were African American, they were black. And they were dressed to the nines. And it was just like you said, it's like they're wearing like all these layers, they've got the hats. And I'm like, you guys got to be dying out here, standing out, because there were so many people at the funeral home, they were waiting outside to get in, you know.
Well, even looking at old snapshots of like picnics or
Mhm.
family reunions years ago, the men came in suits
Absolutely.
and their hats and
Honestly, it wasn't that long
to
ago.
a family reunion.
So you don't have, anybody have an answer? What happened?
Yeah,
What happened?
What do you mean?
Well, why would they don't seem uncomfortable.
That's because they were used to it.
I think so. It's just what
No,
you did.
we're spoiled.
Yeah, we're spoiled.
Right, but my point is I don't think they were sweating. Like we So is it like your core temperature has changed? What's that?
The desire for ornamentation. Like,
No, I know why they did it.
Oh.
But I'm saying they don't look uncomfortable, and they're not like, there's not sweat beating down their face or anything.
probably were long sleeves.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, to the converse, they wore those things in this weather too. Like Matt's mom told me stories about people she knew that went to the ice bowl and they were dressed in stockings and, you know.
Especially the coach, right? Those are the famous
Right,
pictures.
and suits up, but
The coach is wearing a suit on the sidelines
Right.
instead of the hoodie.
exactly.
Maybe
Yeah.
it keeps them cooler.
I don't know.
Having all these-
I don't know. Anyways, well, they weren't. It wasn't polyester, so I think that's probably part of it.
Well, that's-
So it's probably cotton or linen like this.
I'm fascinated by that also.
I don't know what changed. That's my
I
question.
don't think it was
I
normal.
don't think it's ornamentation. I think it's physical. Right? But I mean, the ornamentation is part of it, but because we're kind of slobs now. But
Exactly.
you can't be a slob and be a priest. There you go. Well, and this is reflected then, like I said, weddings, right? There's an appropriate attire for weddings. Although I went to a wedding, I actually conducted a wedding where one of the family members came in a tuxedo shirt. You know, it was a T-shirt, but with the tuxedo. I'm like, well, I guess kudos for the attempt, right?
Don't you think there's also appropriate attire for funerals?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I've seen some pretty bad examples.
Well, and the point is it like here, the clothing reflects the disposition. So what do you think about what's happening is going to be reflected in how you dress. Yeah. Now, I mean, we don't want to be too judgmental about it all because people's standards are different. It's very culturally defined, right? But yeah, there seems to be appropriate and inappropriate. Same thing with pastors. I mean, even the most lax pastors I know will still wear, like, you know, they don't wear ripped jeans and whatnot. Not in our tradition anyway.
We went to a funeral last week, Monday,
Yeah.
in Fredonia, and one man had a white shirt and a suit on, and his dad even came with dressed like this, you know, more just casual sweater.
Really? Yeah.
It's like, I thought maybe he's a doctor or a lawyer or something.
Yeah.
Dressed
Like I say, it is cultural too. But I think this is part of where we as pastors tend to have the desire to have some tradition of a liturgical vestment. And this is really helpful at a funeral or whatnot. I went to one funeral where nobody could tell who the pastor was because he was dressed like everybody else. Right? And that just functionally, that's just not helpful. It's like, I need to know when the party comes in, which guy in the polo shirt is the one that I'm supposed to be listening to.
Oh, we went to a funeral a while back where they all wore flannel shirts because that was, and they asked for that, you know.
Yeah.
Because that's all that the deceased wore. That was my experience. Yeah. And,
Yeah, you were there.
yeah.
But I saw pictures of it.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
fun.
Yeah, and so they did it kind of out of
Yeah.
respect, I don't know, respect, if that's the word, but,
That seems.
what he had.
Yeah. This is really getting off tangent, but
Just a little.
I had a funeral where the guy died on his bike. So then everybody came dressed as bikers. I had a funeral where a guy died in the deer stand. So they all came in their camo. Yeah, we've had all of that. Yeah, especially young people. And I think that's just, just culturally, they don't know how to handle such a situation. They don't understand that it is actually time for reverence, right? That this is as practical, no, it's as theological as it is practical. In any case, this is obviously temple service,
One
so
quick question.
Yeah, go
I've
ahead.
always wondered, we're talking about dress, I've always wondered, what is the proper, like if a woman wants to wear a hat to church? Does she keep it on the whole time?
Yeah,
And men don't?
Right.
Right. The
Okay.
woman can keep hers on, but
right,
men should.
The whole time?
right.
Okay.
Yeah, you can wear your hat in church.
Okay.
Um,
Because if I want to wear a hat, I just didn't know.
okay, Ruth McKenna was one that
Oh,
always
yes.
wore a hat.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
especially if it's like Easter or.
Right.
or,
Yeah, some of our congregations have renewed a tradition of the ladies making Easter hats and all wearing their hats on Easter.
I think it's cute.
Yeah,
Okay, I just wondered.
yeah. No, it's because of the head covering
Okay,
aspect. The woman keeps her head covered.
okay.
Is that in the epistles or something? I thought.
Yeah, it's from Paul, right? Some people take that very literally, right? And they actually, in the Eastern Church, this is true. Like when you go into an Eastern Church, they actually have, headscarves on the wall for you to use if you didn't bring one, so that you can cover your head.
Oh,
Yeah. But that's a whole other topic. Yeah. So what I wrote here, Yahweh attends to priestly clothing. Their external appearance should mirror the internal official disposition as ministers of God. In other words, dressed for the job. In Old Testament liturgical theology, holiness is contagious in that God transmits it through his means of grace, and it can be acquired through contact with most holy things. All right? So physical contact is a thing. Our tendency to limit holiness to ethics, so to be holy is to do the right thing, or to be unholy, to do the wrong thing, makes such theology difficult for us to understand. But the biblical concept of holiness has a dynamic to it. And here's an analogy. It could be compared to a lethal electric current if it comes in contact with people who are not already charged with it. Right? So this is true with DC less than AC. I'm looking at Matt. Matt knows about electricity, right? But this was static, right? You discharge first before you touch something, lest you get, right? So that you want your charge to be the same as the thing you're touching, so that you don't have that discharge, right? Is that what they call it? Yeah, discharge. So it's like that. You need to be holy in order to come in contact with holy things. Otherwise, you're going to have a discharge, right? There's going to be a big zap, and that can hurt and harm you. What's that?
That hurts.
Yeah, that hurts. Right. The classic examples are those who improperly touched or even looked at the Ark of the Covenant. The 70 men of Beth Shemesh in 1 Samuel 6. We'll get to that here pretty soon. And that's this week? No, we only did Samuel for a week. And then we're doing baptism, confession stuff for a few weeks, and then we'll come back to Samuel. So you'll get that, in a month or two. Uzzah in 2 Samuel 6. Apparently, Yahweh here is tightening the Mosaic law. That's my suggestion. While the Torah prohibited lay contact with the sanctuary and its contents in general, it did not explicitly prohibit lay contact with the sacerdotal vestments, the priestly vestments. So here, only the priest can wear the priestly vestments. Their holy garments, in their holy garments, they shall not sanctify the people. So these garments themselves are a mark of holiness, and they can't come in contact with the unholy either. So this, all of this conversation through, as we've seen it through Ezekiel, is, I think, so foreign to us because we don't think of holy and unholy as categories at all. There's kind of, I don't know, the closest we could say is like churchy and not churchy, maybe.
People have to really be careful,
Mhm.
I think, in what they did or didn't do.
Right. Well, and that's what it really comes down to, is being careful with the holy things, with the things of God. Right? Because, like with the sacrament of the altar, this is the notable example in the New Testament, is that those who received Christ's body and blood outside of faith, that is believing it is his body and blood under bread and wine, receive it to their judgment, to their hurt and harm. So without faith, they are not made holy to actually receive the holy gift. So that faith has to be given first in order to be able to handle Christ's body and blood that way, to touch the Holy One, if you like. So we do still have that in a sense, right? But whenever I teach this topic, for most people, it's like, I don't know. We got you're relatively new members, right? I mean, outside of our churches, maybe Roman Catholic churches, the idea that you don't receive the Lord's Supper until you've been prepared to receive it is pretty foreign. They just say, y'all come up now, and And it's like, well, if you believe it's Christ's body and blood, then you'll receive it. If you don't, then you don't receive anything. That's kind of that's the Baptist approach. Like, that does seem to come in contradiction with the witness of how what do you want to say? Yeah, the precedent? No. Yeah, the precedent sacrifices of the temple, how they're brought into the Lord's Supper, they're assumed into Christ's body and blood as our priestly meat and drink, as we sing in the hymn. That you don't handle it without being first made holy. So they had the ritual washings we've talked about. Now we have the ritual clothing as well. And also their ornamentation, or their garment, or the way they take care of their hair. I think I gave you some references about the hair. I might have. Or maybe I just chose to leave it off. I left it off. Because, then you would be like, Pastor, you need to get a trim. I would like a haircut, but time. They shall neither shave their heads. That was only done in times of mourning. You shave your head. That would show your great sorrow, and it would prohibit you from being in the temple or tabernacle before it. Right?
Do the monks use any of that as reference?
No, and this is always the danger too, is that these are new, this is Old Testament. The New Testament does take some of the ideas into the New, but not always one-to-one correlation. The actual thing may change, but the principle might stay the same. The idea that you would, dress for the occasion, and that you would tend for your body. By the way, they would let their hair grow pretty long. So by long here, we're talking about, shoulder length or longer than shoulder length. So that's not that. But they did trim not the phylacteries, but other hair. Different people seem to understand this in different ways. Different Jewish sects, for example, today will do this differently, but they still do it. And keep your hair well trimmed, right? So it's time for a beard trim too. No drinking wine when he enters the inner court. So this is not a prohibition against alcohol, which people get confused. There's no teetotaling in the Bible. There's just a prohibition against drinking to excess in a way that he would not be able to serve as a priest because he couldn't even get through the words without slurring his speech or something, right? So that's the idea there. And then this bit about, remember, these are the Zadokite priests, the highest class, which we talked about at the beginning of the class, that they have a unique instruction about who they can marry, right? You shall not take as a wife a widow or a divorced woman, but take virgins of the descendants of the house of Israel, or widows of priests. Yeah, so very narrow expectation there. Now this does come out in the New Testament, as that Paul says in his pastoral epistle. I can't remember if it's Titus or Timothy. That actually pastors are to be the husband of one wife, right? So that's not talking about serial marriage. It's talking about divorce. Now, a lot of people in our church really disagree on this, and we're not all on the same page. So we've gotten kind of Roman canonical law about this and said, well, if your wife walked out on you, then you could be restored as pastor, but if you chose to split with your wife, then you can't really serve as pastor anymore in our church. We have kind of basically three things that kick you out of the church. One is false doctrine, but that's the hardest one, to actually remove somebody for false doctrine, which is kind of ironic, right? It's easier if they're bad with money. In other words, if they've filed for bankruptcy, you're automatically removed. You're just removed. Can't be a pastor if you file for bankruptcy, okay? Or if you're divorced, right? And then maybe you can be restored after a time with both of those, but generally not. So we have the same idea. Pastor Riley and I talked about this in Banned Books on Friday, and that the conduct of the pastor has a different standard attached to it than the conduct of the lay people. And it's not comfortable for us because we don't think that you merit salvation by your works, right? So the pastor doesn't merit salvation by being more holy than anybody else. So then why would we expect a higher standard of the pastor? And this is New Testament talk, but it's because he's the public minister of the word. So what we're talking about is anything that might get in the way of you hearing the gospel. So if you're sitting in the pew and thinking about how, the stupid thing the pastor said to you earlier in the week, that does get in the way of you being able to hear the rest of the words that he says, right? So this is why Paul has all sorts of things to say about this to Timothy and Titus. Not just husband of one wife, but slow-tempered, not quick-tempered, right? Patient. I don't know. We could go look at the list. I should know these by heart, but try to model them without too much hesitation. But gentle and kind and, not a meanie pants, that kind of thing.
So then, say a pastor or whatever,
Yeah.
that say he's what they call like a second career guy. I mean,
Yeah.
and he wants to come into the ministry now, but he's divorced.
Right.
Is he allowed to then, or just?
It depends. Yeah, it depends. Generally, there's an examination. There's kind of that consideration, and also repentance. So yes, we can't. That would prevent actually a lot of people from entering the ministry because of the proclivities of their youth. The things they did when they were young. Whereas, yes, what we're talking about is within the ministry once you're brought in. This is also one of the reasons why Paul says not a recent convert, not somebody who's recently become a part of the Christian congregation. Is one, it has to do with zealousness, that they get a little bit over zealous because they're so passionate that they get to maybe can be a little bit forceful and impatient and these sorts of things. But it also has to do with maybe previous scandal of life, that it's hard for people to come to trust somebody who they know, was a philanderer when they were a kid, especially if they're in the same community. And you can use Paul as, this is the reason why Paul says this, is because Paul himself had that problem. He had to spend a decade in Damascus before really anybody trusted him. Well, yeah, it makes sense. You were throwing Christians in prison and persecuting them. So it is going to take a long time for people to kind of come to trust you after what you did to them.
And people judge people, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and to judge the pastor, it's really an unpleasant conversation, but it does happen. I have seen congregations that have been able to, where the pastor, broke his marriage in one way or another, but then reconciled with his wife, and then after a period of time, the congregation, they reconciled as well with the pastor and restored him. In opposition, though, of the church leadership at a lot higher level, like the district. The district said, no way, you can't ever do that. And yet they did it. And they have every right to do that, I think. So it is possible that forgiveness can actually cover all wounds, right? We actually believe that. But there is a way that your past kind of haunts you too, right? And that can be used, in a positive way if you're now a pastor, I think, but in a very negative way if it was while you were serving in the ministry. So unfortunately, I have people that I know that have had to leave the ministry as a result. People, classmates or other pastors that I used to be very acquainted with. I'm not going to give you the example, but there's no reason to dredge that up. But the one in particular comes to mind. It was just incredible. How you could live a double life, basically, say one thing in the pulpit and do something very differently privately. But eventually, you get found out. The Lord exposes it. And hopefully it doesn't do so much damage to the congregation that I guess it depends on how you exit. You say, look, I did this, or speak in general terms, and I need to leave the ministry. It's not fitting. It's not appropriate for me to continue to serve you. That can be very helpful because it teaches, the necessity of a Christian life. All right. Yeah. So that's. They have a special marriage thing. If you're a Levitical priest but not of Zadok, it's a little bit more free in the Torah as to who you can marry. But there is something about that. This is really important, 23:24. They shall teach my people the difference between the holy and the unholy, and cause them to discern between the unclean and clean, which is what we've been doing. So this is part of the priest's job, is actually to, both through their behavior and their preaching, but also maybe just doctrinally, just through teaching, that there is a difference between the holy and the unholy, right? Paul says these things must not be named amongst you. That is, they can't be a part of your life because they desecrate you. They make you unfit to receive. So That's something that we do. I mean, largely you can just do this from the Ten Commandments, but yeah, unclean and clean. Here's something that you don't think about the priests doing, but they did, especially before the time of the kings. In controversy, they stand as judges and judge it according to my judgments. So they're the legal, they're the judicial branch, if you like. All right. And this was true in the Old Testament up until the kings, and then David and Solomon, well, Solomon too. But sometimes the prophets do, but generally it's the kings that are the ones who take the judgment from the priests. Otherwise, you go to the priests. So the religious judgment, what does God say about this? And then the consequence, secular, how it's lived out in then your daily life, the judgment there, are both pronounced by the pastor or the priest in this case. So this is true for us too. So if you sinned, you come to the pastor, you confess, you hear the word of absolution. And the pastor often will say, okay, now, you've sinned against this person, would you like me to go with you? And we can go and try to reconcile with them. Or do you want to do it alone? That kind of thing. And there'll be follow-up and all this kind of, because there's always earthly consequence, right? If you made a mess of your marriage, you can hear the word of absolution, and then the pastor will direct you towards like how to administrate that, right? How to deliver that forgiveness then to the one that you've sinned against. We don't like that part because we don't want pastor to be that involved in our life, I think. But who else is going to do it? Right? I mean, family court would, but you're not going to like the result there at all. Because there's no forgiveness, ever. I mean, it just doesn't happen. The judge doesn't pronounce forgiveness and absolve them and reconcile them. It's always about how can we amicably split these people so that it's not so terrible. It's like, well, okay. So that's why, having the priest bring the judgment is that they have both words. They have both law and gospel. Whereas if you go just to a civil judge, administrative judge, you're not going to get that. You're only going to have law. There might be some mercy, quote unquote, so they don't give you quite the same penalty that you deserve, but that's not the gospel. All right. So they shall keep my laws, my statutes, in all my appointed meetings. So that's the liturgical year, right? And they shall hallow my Sabbaths. So that's the weekly observances. So we have the weekly and the seasonal observances. So all the stuff you expect your pastor to do. Tell us when is it Epiphany 2? Yeah, it's Epiphany 2. Oh, well, I expect to hear the wedding at Cana. Yes, you're right. You'll hear the wedding at Cana today. As you know, right? Okay. So that's, these are actually appointed by God. Our liturgical year is through tradition. It's not, I don't have to do the wedding at Cana today, but that's what we're doing. All right. So this is all pretty normal stuff, and it's really just a summary of what we read before. All right, let's read. We can do it. I've got 30 seconds. 2 more. They shall not defile themselves by coming near a dead person. I think we've talked about that before, right? Touching a dead person. Only for father or mother, for son or daughter, for brother or unmarried sister may they defile themselves by coming near the dead person. So family funerals only. After he is cleansed, they shall count 7 days for him, right? So then after the funeral, 7 days before he can serve again. And on the day that he goes to the sanctuary to minister in the sanctuary, he must offer a sin offering in the inner court, says the Lord God. This is in the Old Testament. This is in Moses' law as well. This is not something new. And you shouldn't take this the wrong way. Some of this it's not just hygiene. It is about ritual purity. Unclean, and a dead body is unclean. But, of course, he can be restored. And part of the problem is the way that they use dead persons in the world. Like the pagans used dead bodies for all sorts of religious rites. Yeah, it's kind of lots of gross stuff there. We don't have to get into detail about. And by the way, I wrote on the here. This doesn't prohibit us from approaching the dead to minister to grieving families, perform funerals, commemorate departed saints. What's lacking here is the resurrection of the body and the life everlasting. So, when we handle a dead body, it's in the hope of the resurrection, which is, look, Ezekiel just doesn't quite have that in view yet. Remember, he's seeing things from a long way off yet. So that's part of it, I think, is what's going on there. So we have that. There's more on the sheet if you want to read that about unclean and clean, or holy and common, sacred and profane. In other words, how they approach all things. right? So you can read that. And then more about funerals and how Christians can come in contact with dead bodies. Probably should, to learn you are mortal. The closest we get is on Ash Wednesday when you get the ashes of the palms on your head and you're declared dead in some of our churches. But all right. So I guess we could have done more detail, but I didn't want to get stuck in this chapter too much longer. Because now we have to move on to inheritance of the Levitical priests, which will be fun because we have to talk about land rights. Everybody likes to talk about land rights and property rights, right? It's not your land if you have to pay taxes on it, by the way. Yeah. It's not your land if you're paying taxes. Property tax. I know what you think it's your house.
Try to not pan and see what happens.
Well, yes, exactly. Well,
Find out whose it is.
yeah. That's when you resolve things with violence. Unfortunately. Yeah. Well, yeah, I saw Argentina, they have a new president, new administration. Yeah, he seems like an interesting guy. This is one of the things, they're actually patrolling their waters. Turns out there were a lot of Chinese fishing boats fishing off the shores of Argentina in their territorial waters. That was just being allowed. They're just like, yeah, whatever, you can take our fish. He's like, nope, we're not going to do that anymore. We're just going to shoot you down, shoot you out of the water. Well, a government that doesn't protect its people, even violently, is not a government at all, ultimately. Yeah, right. The question is all sorts of other questions. Hello, Gary. Good. I'm walking out with my microphone. I should not do that. This is the wrong microphone for church. Let's
We literally didn't snow until 6 morning.
Really?
Over Friday.
Yeah.
Friday. Just rain. Yeah. I mean, it was snowing. Nothing was Yeah, because it was cold. Yeah. So we started thinking, like, I had to shovel